Hi everyone. Usually on the first video of the new year, I'd be talking about the 5 things to expect in immigration for the remainder of the year. That was a very popular video that we had last year, and we're going to do it again. However, since we're going to have a new president in the US in a few short weeks, and because we already know his stance towards immigration is much more positive than the past administration, I think I'm going to save that until after he is inaugurated and we hear more from him and see what more he says or does. Today, I'm going to talk about what other political leaders are asking for him to change and what I think can and should be changed as soon as he gets into office. My name is Mejer. I'm an immigrant from Chile as well as an immigration attorney. When I was a child, my parents paid an attorney to get us legal status. That attorney took our money and didn't do anything. I had to figure out, me and my family had to figure out how to work the immigration system, get ourselves a green card, and then get citizenship. And that after living here without legal status for almost 10 years. Today, I've become a US citizen, and now I want to help you do the same thing. My goal is to make your life better because you worked with us. If you have an immigration issue, call us. We'll see if we're a good fit. We won't take your money if we can't help you. Now, I want to talk about for a few minutes what immigration groups and leading Democrats are asking to be changed in US immigration with this new administration. There is a group that has developed their own plan for President-elect Biden, which they call the roadmap. I'm not sure if this group is leading, but they are a group. It includes House of Representatives Pramila Jayapal, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Yvette Clarke, Judy Chu, Jesus Garcia, and Veronica Escobar. The roadmap goes beyond what President-elect Biden has suggested he will do and does much more than reverse what has happened in the past 4 years. The roadmap advocates for 14 changes. First, a pathway to citizenship for the almost 11 million undocumented people in the US. I talked about this in my amnesty video that is linked below, and I'm certainly in favor for helping immigrants come out of the shadows as long as they meet certain criteria and they're not disqualified because of crime or other similar issues. Secondly, clearing the existing backlog of naturalization applications. Frankly, I would love to see a clearing of the backlog for all immigration applicants, not just citizenship. People have been waiting for far too long to get a decision, and that needs to change. 3, prioritize family reunification, including for eligible individuals who are deported, detained, or in sanctuary. I mentioned previously that the Trump administration changed the priority of USCIS from one of family reunification to one of enforcement. I think changing it back and putting processes in place that make it more than just words would be ideal. Now, how you reunify family that have been deported, that have an order of removal, but maybe they're in sanctuary or maybe they're presently detained, it really means allowing waivers for certain things, maybe changing the 3 and 10 year bar, maybe changing the permanent bar, maybe revisiting what is a disqualifying crime for immigration purposes. Maybe we have too many aggravated felonies. Maybe we can revisit whether some misdemeanors rise to the level of criminal turpitude. There's a lot that can be done here, and they're very vague about what it means to reunify family, including they've been deported, detained, or in sanctuary. They don't really say how to do that. But the way to do that is, so every consult that we have comes down to 3 questions. 1, do they have a path for legal status? 2, is there something that disqualifies them? And 3, can we fix it? Somebody that's been deported or is in deportation proceedings now has something that disqualifies them. But that's question number 2. They first need to have a path. So if there's a path for citizenship for the 11 million undocumented, and if there's a way to fix, like through a waiver, for things that make them ineligible, maybe because of crimes, maybe because of multiple entries, that would go a long way to reunifying family, particularly if those waivers are extended to people that have already been deported outside the United States. There hasn't been much conversation to include people outside of the United States, but that's really what this third point is going for. 4, establish a system of scalable civil consequences for immigration violations. This is interesting. Currently, the default for almost every immigration violation is detention and/or deportation, and they think that should change. This means decriminalizing immigration violations. I don't see that likely happening. 5, eliminate for-profit immigration facilities. While I agree with the principle, I don't think it's likely. Most prisons throughout the US are now run by for-profit agencies, meaning companies. If we were to do this for immigrants, we would also need to do this for our own citizens in prisons, and I don't think that is going to happen. I do think that changes need to be made to the present system. There needs to be a lot more oversight, and there needs to be sanctions and consequences imposed on those who violate basic human rights. 6, end the use of state and local jails and prisons for immigration detention. I think this is absurd. I mean, what's the alternative? Move away from private companies? Okay, fine. But that means that we're going to have state employees. Now, if you then, on top of that, want to stop using state and local jails to house immigrants, that means you want the federal government to build more prisons. What's the point? If the state and local jails have the room and they have a contract with the federal government, why get rid of it? What's your alternative? I think it's unrealistic to expect the US government to not only change their detention from for-profit to something else, but to also require that an unknown number of immigrants be put in some new facilities that need to be built. That is an inefficient use of resources. I think it's the wrong problem to focus on. 7, promote alternatives to detention and end detention of vulnerable populations, including families and children. This would require giving judges more discretion on who gets released while providing a framework for that discretion so that decisions are more uniform throughout the country. In addition, ICE or CBP should exercise more discretion in releasing immigrants rather than detaining them. This could include some combination of ankle monitors and monetary bonds. But who's going to determine who's vulnerable? This would need to be defined. Under the Obama administration, there were 4 priorities put in place. If you came into contact with ICE, you would be released unless you were a recent entrant, unless you were a criminal, a terrorist, or a danger to society in some other fashion. Anybody that wasn't one of those 4 things was often released, even by an ICE officer or Customs Border Patrol. But when Trump came into power, when he became president, he removed those priorities, but he didn't replace them with anything. So now everyone is a priority. No one is getting released. And they really focused in on the judges and put pressure on them to keep immigrants detained. And we have seen the number of bond motions being given has reduced dramatically because ICE is not giving any now, or almost none. Probably less than 3% of cases do they actually give. Now, I don't know what that number is. I just know in our practice, the numbers have gone down dramatically. Someone is getting in contact with ICE. ICE is not releasing them. It may be 2 to 3 weeks before the immigrant sees a judge, and that judge is now granting a lot less bond applications than they did in the past. So this priorities should be introduced so that ICE and CBP can exercise more of its discretion so that people that shouldn't be detained don't need to be detained. They shouldn't have to wait 2 weeks to a month to see a judge for a judge to say some version of, why is this person still detained? I think we can all agree that we should not be imprisoning children or separating families. And I think we need to come up with viable plans that allow for that. But who determines who's vulnerable? Well, that would need to be defined. 8, ensure that no one is removed, expelled, or denied access to the US without guaranteed meaningful access to legal defense. While I understand their argument, I think it's more important to end the policy that President Trump put in place, where people have expedited immigration hearings. Expedited hearings, expedited removals without even seeing a judge, being removed without seeing a judge and without access to counsel. I think that's a bigger problem than meaningful access to legal defense. There is case law that requires an immigrant to have legal defender in criminal cases, but not in immigration hearings. It seems like it would be cost prohibitive to provide adequate legal counsel for every asylum seeker. But really, the focus should not be what it costs. It should be what is right. What does our Constitution intend? I do think this needs to be much more carefully reviewed and implemented, but to truly be effective and fair and at a reasonable cost. I do think that every immigrant should have access to legal counsel. How is that done is a good question. How is it paid for is a good question. Are we creating the equivalent of a public defender, but for immigration purposes? Again, I don't know, but what I do know is immigrants are making decisions on criminal cases, not understanding the immigration consequences. And by the time they speak to an immigration attorney, sometimes it's too late. So should every immigrant have a right to an attorney paid for by the government? I can certainly see the argument for other side. I certainly, as an immigration attorney, I see the need for good quality counsel for immigrants. The need is tremendous. There aren't enough good quality attorneys to do that. But who should pay for it? Well, that's something that needs to be discussed. Number 9, create an independent court system with an independent immigration judge. I think this is a great idea. I've talked about this in prior videos. During the Trump administration, one of the most concerning policies put in place was the immigration court judges were required by the Justice Department to deny a certain number of applications, as well as process a certain number each year in order to get, job raises or to maintain their employment. We've seen the Department of Justice overturn immigration judge decisions, Board of Immigration Appeals decisions on purely political reasons. And when you look at the analysis, it just doesn't make sense. They come to a conclusion without having a fair understanding of what the law is. This has caused many cases to be processed in a short time because judges want to keep their jobs. So that is not due process under the law. Due process should be the standard in all of our courts according to the Constitution. Notice and an opportunity to be heard. And we're seeing decisions where I know it's happened to my clients. The courts uniformly changed the court date, did not mail out a notice neither to myself nor to my client. If we hadn't checked the automated system, if we hadn't checked online to see that the court had changed, well, they would have ordered my client removed and we would not have even known about it. That is not due process. That is a judge that is making a decision, not for the right reasons. And that needs to change. Immigration should be like bankruptcy courts, separate and independent from the Department of Justice. What we saw under the Trump administration was the politicizing of immigration courts and immigration system. That should not happen. And we need to make sure that it can never happen again. And in order to do that, the immigration court needs to be independent of the Department of Justice, independent of the executive agency. It should be a court under our legal courts. Remember, the U.S. system has the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial, the courts. Immigration courts is an agency under the executive, and that specifically the Department of Justice. It needs to change and move to the judiciary. That way, it is co-equal and independent. 10, new border policies. As I mentioned, I think we can all be kinder and more respectful. We want our borders protected, but we should treat everyone humanely. And 11, end border patrol checkpoints in the interior part of the country. Prior to the Trump administration, Border Patrol could only check for immigrants within 100 miles of our borders and at the borders themselves. When that changed, fear rippled through the US. Customs and Border Patrol was boarding buses and asking for IDs. People were being approached at work, at home, while out running errands. Communities started to create groups to inform people that ICE and CBP were closing in on certain businesses. I would prefer to live in a country that doesn't have a fissure of fear running through it. We are all suffering enough with COVID. Yes, we should absolutely protect our borders. And yes, we absolutely support legal immigration. But we don't need Customs and Border Patrol accosting people throughout the country. 12, change employment-based immigration so that those who have a visa can change employers, bring their families, and have paths to citizenship. This is a very interesting suggestion. There obviously needs to be some changes to the employment-based immigration. Is it reasonable that employees who are sponsored by an employer are basically held hostage by their employer? Either you do what I tell you to do, or I will fire you. If I fire you, you lose your immigration status and you could be deported. Do we not want families to be together? But we also have record unemployment in the US and an economic situation that may impact us for decades due to COVID. All of that must be considered before any changes are put in place for employment-based immigration. The US has a need for low-skilled labor and skilled labor. We need to put a framework in place that as our economy changes, so does the kind of help that we need from immigrants. It needs to be a streamlined process, an understandable process, and not one that takes businesses 2 to 3 years just to get the employee that they need to come into the United States. It shouldn't be that expensive. It shouldn't be that difficult. And it's only gotten worse under Trump. 13, ensure access to healthcare and housing for all immigrants. Look, this is a wonderful idea, but it seems like it would be unfair to citizens and permanent residents in the US if those coming to the US receive something that they don't have. Let's see what we can do to have access to healthcare and housing for everyone. I remember when I moved to Israel in 1996. So as an immigrant to Israel, well, actually, I was a citizen of Israel since I was born. So I was a returning citizen. But the right of return for Israelis is true for Jews that are not citizens of Israel, as well as Israeli citizens who have not been in Israel for 7 years. So you go and the government gives you certain benefits. They don't give you free housing, but they do give you financial incentives for job training, for they reduced taxes, lower cost for housing. So you get lower cost for healthcare. There are benefits as an immigrant for a period of time to transition. And frankly, there's no reason why the US can't do that for the type of immigrants that they want. And that's what Congress should do, is determine what kind of people, low skilled or skilled, does America need? What kind of immigrants do they want to attract? And we could decide through legislation to determine and to give benefits to those groups of people. I think it's a worthwhile conversation. It's a worthwhile debate, and it's long overdue. 14, create a truth and reconciliation process for those who have suffered under an inhumane system for decades. What on earth does this even mean? It is not clear at all who has suffered. How would that be fixed? What needs to change? Is it the suggestions they put forward already in the roadmap, or is it something else? I think we can all agree that the immigration system in the US needs a massive overhaul. To change it, we need people on both sides of the aisle. That means Democrats and Republicans agreeing to make changes. That means more people and ultimately a lot more money put towards changing the current system. With the country grappling with thousands of deaths a day from COVID, even though we have a vaccine, there is much that is going to have to be considered in every area of our nation and government before drastic change can happen. Do we want it to happen? Absolutely. We would rejoice with everyone if legal immigration were easier for our clients and all who want to enter the US. Do I think it will happen overnight or even in the next 4 years? I think there will be small positive changes, but I think it unlikely that the entire system will be dramatically different from 4 years from now. It isn't that Trump has changed immigration laws. He hasn't, but the mentality has completely changed. Immigration as a whole, and there's over 7 agencies that are involved in immigration. The mentality used to be, how can I help you achieve your immigrant goals, to how can I deny your goals and aspirations for any reason possible. So we need the mindset to change again, but we also need simple fixes. Border security, we can all agree as to that. Fix the backlogs. You know, over 1 million cases in immigration courts, people waiting for decades for visas. Clean up that process. Simplify the method to legally enter the US. Future flow of immigrants. So once we have a path for legal status for the undocumented immigrants, they go for that. You've now fixed the illegal immigrants you have here today. You implement border security that keeps people from illegally entering the United States. Third, you need to address future flow. What immigrants do we want to come in the future? For agriculture, high tech, doctors, nurses. What immigrants do we want? Skilled labor and unskilled labor. What does that look like for people that want to come here, work for a period of time, but may not want to live here permanently? If they want to come in, give them the opportunity to stay as long as they meet certain criteria. Future flow of immigration. And we need a independent judiciary. I think those are the 4 pillars for reform. Underneath those 4 is a lot of what we have discussed today. Will all that happen? I think it should. But will it? I am hopeful and will remain hopeful. But I do think there's going to be small positive changes. I do think the mentality is going to change. And depending on what the election is, if the Democrats win and if President Biden puts immigration as a priority, and he should, because I know Trump has made it a priority the past 4 years, we should get meaningful reform. If there are changes, you'll hear about it from me. Please like and share this video if you found it helpful. If you'd like to hear more about a certain topic, let us know in the comments below. Until next time, stay healthy and be well.